Once I learned about integrity, I then decided that it was time for me to step up fully and become a businessman, the ultimate decision maker, the reason I left law, to be a businessman. I was going to leave to serve as an employee, set up my own company the way I wanted to, and already have my first client. For me, having my first client was also a transition because I still felt that they did not operate with integrity. In my mind, at that time of my life, I felt that I needed them, I needed to make money, and this was my way of staying in communication with a powerful family. Those were my reasons for continuing the relationship. I finally was going to do this. I was going to be setting up my own company. I'd spent 2 years at Jusseur with my objective of learning how to be a businessman. And I felt I'd accomplished that. I'd learned to negotiate deals around the world. I'd learned to network. I'd learned how to make money. I learned to stand for myself. I'd learned to manage teams. I learned to be a voice on a board. I had learned so many things about being a businessman that I never would have learned being a lawyer. As I stepped out in the company, I felt sure I was going to be successful. I had a powerful network. I had a great reputation, and I was hardworking. I felt that nothing could go wrong. What could go wrong? I was so excited. I got in communication with an accountant that set me up with my family trust. I had my own family trust. I named it the Mutoko Family Trust. Mutoko is a village, the village where my father was born, where my grandfather grew up, and where his father grew up. 3 generations of Gomos. And I also had my company, Nook Nominees Pty Ltd, N standing for Norwich, the little town I was born in the United Kingdom, and the UK for the country of my birth. I was so thrilled to create a retainer with Jusseur. I negotiated a $3,000 retainer per month, plus I was going to get $5,000 for every deal I successfully completed. In the scheme of things, $5,000 was not a lot of money compared to the multi-million deals that were being negotiated. And for me, I was still satisfied with that because I saw this as a transition. Next, I needed more money to back me up, so I thought. So once again, I get in communication with Uncle Andrew and I share my vision of creating my own business, and I request money from him. I requested $50,000. I told Andrew that if he were to give me this money, this would be an unsecured loan, and that if I failed, he would lose his money. Andrew responded and gave me the money, $50,000. To today, I'm still moved by who Andrew is for me. He believed in me and believes in me unconditionally, unreservedly. I had no evidence or proof if I was going to be successful or not. And he put his wealth on the line for me. For that, I can only be grateful. In fact, Andrew borrowed the money from a bank for me. So for him, if I failed and couldn't pay him back, the banks were going to go after his assets. I had no assets. I was so grateful that Andrew believed and backed me up. Unlike many people in Australia, when they're starting out their business, they can go and request money from their family. They can go and request money from very close friends. They have deep established networks. I didn't have that. I had Andrew. And Andrew is and was my lifeline. If a white man runs out of money while they're creating their business, they have a network built over generations to access cash, maybe from their mom, their dad, their friends. As a new migrant to Australia, I did not have that network. If I were to fail in business, I would fail in business. If a white man has a crisis while they're creating their business, for example, mom gets sick, the sole responsibility to fix it doesn't fall on them. When I have a crisis in my family, the sole responsibility to fix it is on me and my siblings. If mom is sick and she needs $5,000, I've got to find that $5,000. If my sister is going to university and she needs that rent, I have to find that money. When I'm just starting out and I've just made $10,000 to cover my expenses, the next day, I may get a call from mom, dad, a family member requesting funds. They may need $8,000. It's critical. I'm responsible for that. This is how self-doubt showed up in my business. I would have 7 meetings lined up in a day, and I'd go from meeting after meeting after meeting. I would share how I would help them negotiate deals to grow their businesses. I would make my notes. Then I would go home, open my laptop to create the deal. And when it came to type it out, I just couldn't. In those moments, I was struck by crippling self-doubt. I said to myself, all the people are lying to me. They don't want to work with me. They're being nice and polite. None of them really want to work with me. I'm a gay black man. They're just being nice and polite. So then I would close my laptop, go on my phone, order pork ribs on my credit card, eat, then go to bed. Wake up the next morning and do exactly the same thing. Go to meeting after meeting after meeting. People wanted a proposal, would open up my laptop, would try to type it out, stuck and struck with paralysis. I just couldn't do it. When you're starting out a business, typically you'll be sending out about 5 proposals a week, depending on the kind of business. My kind of business should have been around 5 to 6 proposals a week. In 6 months, I sent out about 2 proposals. I wasn't making money besides the money I was generating from my first client, where I had my $3,000 retainer and from time to time, closing deals. The game in business is to bring in many opportunities. Nobody's going to do that for you. My game in business is to bring and make those opportunities happen. I wasn't doing that. One of the games in business is to bring in more money than spend. I was spending more money than bringing money into the business. And I didn't even know that I was doing that. In fact, I also had a bookkeeper to manage my finances. I remember one day having a meeting with my bookkeeper. She was very concerned. She had asked me if I was going to be able to pay her invoice. And I told her that of course I was going to be able to pay her invoice. She said I didn't have the money to pay her invoice. I said to her, of course I have the money. I've made $6,000 this month. She said to me, no, you haven't. You have lost $6,000 this month. Can't you see the report? The number is in brackets. I then say, does that mean I've been making a loss the past 6 months? She says, yes. As a young businessman, I had seen other entrepreneurs share their stories about how they had applied for credit cards to build their business. Kogan had done that. He's proudly said that he had applied for credit cards, used the money to build his empire. So I thought I would do the same thing too. I applied for a $2,000 credit card with Ignite, Virgin. I remember applying for around a $5,000 credit card. And guess what? Westpac had this amazing offer of a $25,000 credit card. I leapt at the chance, applied for it, and I was successful. I made it. I had lines of credit. This gave me lots of breathing room. These days, I would never use a credit card to build my business. My job as a business person is to create opportunities that bring money and revenue into my business. That's my job. If I'm living off a credit card, there is something fundamentally wrong with the business and the way the business is managed. At that time in my life, I did not know that. I really thought I was being smart and that I had a viable business. Then my business was not viable, but I had no idea. At this point in time, my retainer with Dussault came to an end, but the expenses kept on growing. I had to pay back Andrew for what I had borrowed. I had an agreement to pay for my sister's school fees in partnership with my brother. From time to time, my mom and my dad also needed money. They needed money for their South African permanent residency. But no money was coming into the business. I also needed money to pay for my rent. I needed money for food. I needed money to create the business opportunities. All the Ubers to get to meeting after meeting. All the coffee catch-ups to create the opportunities. All the clothes to look the part as a business person. My expenses outweighed the money I had. I was becoming stressed, anxious. How was I going to create an opportunity? Nothing was materializing. I felt stressed, but I thought, well, every business owner is stressed. They're 100% accountable for their business. This is how it's meant to be now. This is my new life, stressed. I was scared. I had no idea how to create my next opportunity. I felt stuck. And my expenses kept on piling up. I also felt I could not tell anybody. I had to show the world that I had it all handled. If I were to be vulnerable, I thought my reputation would be ruined and nobody would actually want to do business with me. So I suffered in silence. Being a businessman, I knew that things would be challenging and would be difficult, but I had the mindset that things would get better. When I maxed out my first $2,000 credit card, I told myself things would get better. When I maxed out my credit card for about $6,000, I said to myself, things would get better. When I maxed out my $25,000 credit card, I still said to myself, things would get better. I lived in a fantasy that things would get better, and that is what it was to be a businessman. It all came to a head. I had sufficient money to pay my rent, and that was it. I had used up all the money Andrew had given me, all the $50,000. I had used up all my credit cards. I'd maxed them all out. And now there's only sufficient money to pay my rent, then nothing. I wouldn't be able to pay for my food. I wouldn't be able to pay for my sister's school fees. it all came crashing down. I was ashamed. I was stressed. I felt like a failure. But this time, I could no longer pretend that I all had it together. I was going to be found out for the fraud that I really am. An unsuccessful businessman masquerading like a businessman. I call one of my friends Chanel and I say, Chanel, I want to tell you something. I'm so ashamed to tell you this. She says, what is it? I tell her that I've been pretending to be successful as a business person, but I've now run out of money. I have nothing. I have no money to pay for food, and I can't continue living in this apartment. She listens. And I say to her, is it okay if I move in with you and Paul to create the space to clean up my life? She's really excited that I'm going to come and live with her. And she says, I'll need to talk to Paul to see if that works. I've had a slight flicker of hope, but I was still profoundly ashamed. Because now there were many, many other people I had to have this conversation with. I'd come full circle. I lacked integrity. I'd left a company because I had deemed it lacked integrity. Yet, you looked at my life and my business and there was no integrity. My job as a businessman was to generate revenue and ensure that my expenses did not exceed my revenue. I had failed to do that. And now there was a huge impact. I couldn't maintain living where I was living. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't pay for my sister's school fees. I would have to then wind up my business. I would need to find a way to clean up my life. I was completely ashamed.